General Krith stood aboard the Zenithian flagship Glorious Conquest, his mandibles twitching in anticipation. The tactical display before him showed Earth, a lush green planet spinning lazily below. The briefing reports called it a primitive world with minimal resistance, a mere speed bump on the Zenithian Dominion's path to total galactic dominance. The Zenithian officers flanking Krith chattered smugly amongst themselves. Captain Vrak, his second in command, sneered at the grainy satellite images of the Amazon jungle. "A dense organic mess," Vrak scoffed. "These Earthlings must be little more than spear-wielding primitives." Krith let out a satisfied chuff. "The Dominion's expansion proceeds unhindered. Deploy the ground forces. I expect this to be over in an hour." Across the bridge, a young communications officer raised a bony hand. "Sir, we intercepted some primitive radio chatter from the surface. Shall we ignore it?" "Play it," Krith commanded, expecting nothing more than grunts and howls. A voice crackled through the speakers, low, grizzled, and laced with amusement. "Hey boys, you hear that? Sounds like some dumbasses just landed in our backyard." Laughter erupted in the background. $5 says they don't make it 10 minutes. $10 says I steal one of their guns before sunrise. "All right, gentlemen," another voice cut in, gruffer than the rest. "Looks like we got ourselves a party. Somebody put on the good tunes." A moment of silence, then a deafening guitar riff ripped through the speakers. Krith's crest flattened. What is that?" Vrak frowned at the translation screen. "Sir, the transmission is labeled Welcome to the Jungle," whatever that means. Krith shook his head, dismissing the uneasy feeling creeping into his carapace. It didn't matter. The Zenithian troops were already deploying. The first wave of Zenithian shock troops materialized in the jungle with a shimmer of blue light. Their sleek, exo-armored forms moved in perfect coordination, their helmets scanning the environment with hyper-advanced sensors. The jungle, however, did not care. A private named Zil took one step forward and promptly disappeared. Vrak, monitoring from orbit, blinked. "Where did Private Zil go?" Krith squinted at the feed. There was no sign of the soldier. No struggle. No sound. Just missing. Another soldier turned to his right. "Zil?" A shadow flickered in the foliage. A voice, barely a whisper. "Boo." The soldier shrieked and fired wildly into the trees. Something crashed down from above. Zil, hanging upside down, cocooned in vines, blinking in horror. "Help!" he croaked. Before anyone could react, a loud snap rang through the air, followed by a high-pitched whoosh. One of the grunts stepped forward, and a hidden tripwire yanked him skyward. His screams faded into the jungle canopy. The remaining soldiers froze. Then, the music returned. "You know where you are? You're in the jungle, baby." Up on the flagship, Krith watched the live feed with growing horror. "Why are they firing at the trees?" he barked. Vrak hesitated. "Sir, the trees appear to be fighting back." On screen, another soldier ran frantically, his high-tech scanner blaring nonsense. "Command! The terrain is changing." He didn't get to finish. A coconut, of all things, landed at his feet. The moment of confusion lasted just long enough for the explosion to go off. Back in the jungle, Sergeant Jack Mad Dog McAllister watched the chaos unfold through a pair of binoculars, a cigar clenched between his teeth. "Gotta hand it to 'em," he muttered. "They're enthusiastic." Corporal Boom Boom Riley crouched beside him, holding an empty beer can. "You think they figured out the tripwires?" "Yet?" A distant boom sent another alien soldier flying. McAllister exhaled, unimpressed. "Nope." Private Benny Ghost Vasquez emerged from the shadows, holding up a stolen alien plasma rifle. "Told you I'd get one before sunrise." Gunnery Sergeant Duke Six-Pack Harlan popped the tab on another beer. "These guys are softer than a baby's first MRE. What's the play, Sarge?" McAllister took a deep breath, letting the jungle air fill his lungs. Then he grinned. "We introduce them to the real Amazon wildlife." 30 minutes later, the Zenithian ranks were in full disarray. The sensors in their helmets were supposed to detect movement, heat, and biosignatures. What they were not designed for was a drunk Marine who had somehow managed to tame an entire troop of capuchin monkeys and arm them with stolen plasma pistols. One monkey pressed the trigger experimentally. A bright blue bolt shot into the air. Another monkey, inspired, began firing wildly. The jungle lit up with neon energy. "Sir!" a Zenithian officer shouted into his comms. "The natives! They have trained the wildlife to use our own weapons." "Against us!" Back on the flagship, Krith's mandibles twitched. "That's impossible." The officer on the ground turned his visor toward the carnage. One monkey was dual-wielding pistols, screaming in what could only be described as battle rage. Another had somehow managed to mount a fleeing Zenithian soldier and was steering him directly into a tree. Krith let out a slow, defeated sigh. Maybe, just maybe, they had underestimated this planet. The Zenithian advance had officially stalled. What was meant to be a clean planetary pacification had turned into a nightmarish disaster of disappearing troops, exploding foliage, and what the battle reports were now referring to as hostile monkey insurgents. On board the glorious conquest, General Krith paced the bridge, mandibles clicking in frustration. The jungle was a tactical anomaly, unlike any battleground the Zenithians had encountered. Their forces had fought in asteroid fields, acid rainstorms, and molten lava plains, but none of those places had trees that ate soldiers or wildlife that conducted armed insurgencies. "We are the Zenithian Dominion," Krith growled, slamming a clawed fist onto the holotable. "We do not lose to vegetation." Captain Vrak cleared his throat. "Sir, the reports indicate that our weapons are ineffective against the terrain." "The terrain?" Krith's eye twitched. "Do I need to remind you that we have plasma rifles, force fields, and orbital support? We are facing creatures that have barely left their own moon." Vrak hesitated, then gestured to the latest battlefield footage. On screen, a squad of Zenithian troopers huddled together, frantically whispering. Their sleek high-tech helmets were dented and covered in mud. Their once-polished armor was tangled with vines and coated in mysterious jungle residue. Then, movement in the trees. The soldiers whirled, scanning for threats. The jungle was silent. Too silent. A rustling sound. One of the Zenithians raised his plasma rifle, eyes wide. Motion detected. Something heavy dropped onto him from the canopy. There was a muffled oof, a cloud of disturbed foliage, and the soldier was gone. The remaining troops froze, gripping their rifles tighter. A second soldier turned in slow, calculated horror, whispering, "They're in the trees." Suddenly, a voice, deep, gravelly, and entirely too amused, boomed through their helmets. "You're goddamn right we are." The trees exploded into action. Mud-covered Marines, camouflaged in streaks of green and brown, leaped down from the canopy. Tripwires snapped, launching alien soldiers into nets strung between the branches. One Zenithian managed to squeeze off a plasma shot before a vine lassoed his ankle and dragged him screaming into the underbrush. Sergeant Jack Mad Dog McAllister crashed through a bush, shotgun in hand, grinning like a madman. He dropped low, planted his feet and fired. The closest alien went flying backward into a tree. "Welcome to the jungle, Boom! An explosion rocked the clearing. Corporal Boom Boom Riley had just chucked a grenade inside an overturned Zenithian drop pod, sending alien soldiers diving for cover. Gunnery Sergeant Duke Six-Pack Harlan strolled through the chaos, shotgun casually slung over his shoulder, cracking open another beer with his teeth. "Y'all want some real jungle training? This here's the accelerated course." The Zenithians, realizing they were woefully outmatched in whatever this brand of warfare was, scrambled for retreat. Unfortunately for them, retreating meant running blindly into another trap. "Hey, Boom Boom!" McAllister shouted over the gunfire. "What's that thing you rigged over by the riverbank?" "You mean the surprise party?" "Yeah, the one with the coconuts." Boom Boom grinned. "Oh, that one's ready to rock." Somewhere in the distance, another tripwire was triggered. A cluster of seemingly normal coconuts hidden in the brush detonated, sending 2 Zenithians cartwheeling through the air. General Krith, watching this from orbit, felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into his gut. Was this panic? This cannot be happening, he muttered, claws gripping the edge of the command console. These humans, their tactics are not in any known playbook. Captain Vrak, rubbing his temples, nodded grimly. Sir, I believe that is the problem. Back on the battlefield, chaos reached new heights. Private Benny Ghost Vasquez had disappeared again. Nobody knew where, only that Zenithians kept vanishing moments before he sent updates over comms. Ghost here, he whispered into the radio, unseen. I just convinced one of these alien boys that their own commander is the jungle's ancient war god. He's currently on his knees offering his plasma rifle as tribute. McAllister let out a wheezing laugh. You're messing with their heads now? Ghost's grin was practically audible. Tactical, psychological warfare, Sarge. We outnumber 'em in pure crazy. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Miguel Laptop Alvarez had finally cracked into the Zenithians' targeting system. Hunched over a captured wrist console, he tapped a few buttons and grinned. All right, boys. I just redirected one of their orbital drones. McAllister glanced over. Where's it aimed? Alvarez held up a small Game Boy, one of the buttons rewired into an alien interface. Their own supply drop zone. A distant explosion lit up the jungle. Somewhere on the battlefield, a squad of alien reinforcements, just freshly deployed, had the brief misfortune of looking up in time to see their own cargo pod hurtling straight down at them. McAllister slapped Alvarez on the back. God damn, son, that's innovation. Across the jungle, the Zenithians were reaching their limit. Soldiers abandoned their weapons, sprinting wildly in every direction. Some took their chances with the river, only to be met by a battalion of territorial piranhas. One panicked Zenithian, his armor covered in claw marks, was waving his arms at his superior officer. Commander, permission to retreat. The trees are hostile. The monkeys are armed. And I swear I saw one of the humans surfing a crocodile. McAllister, indeed, had chosen to ride an especially large reptile down the riverbank, shotgun in one hand, cigar in the other. By this point, General Krith had stopped yelling. He stood frozen, watching his elite army dissolve into primal fear and disorder. He exhaled slowly. Call the fleet, he ordered. Pull the remaining forces out of that cursed jungle before they all lose their minds. Vrak hesitated. Sir, are we retreating? Krith clenched his mandibles. No, not a retreat. A tactical withdrawal. The Zenithians still had their dignity. Then, from the jungle, a new sound cut through the chaos. A distant voice, cocky and brimming with amusement, shouted loud enough to be picked up by Zenithian comms. Hey, alien boys, you forgot your toys. And with that, a group of Marines emerged from the foliage, carrying a stolen Zenithian battle mech. The mech, originally a towering instrument of war, had been repainted with crude human graffiti. The word, Daddy's Home, was scrawled across, the front in bright red jungle berries. Corporal Boom Boom Riley stood on its shoulder, beer in one hand, remote detonator in the other. Krith stared in complete, unfiltered horror. Then, McAllister clicked his radio on. Guess what, boys? He said. We just became a spacefaring power. Krith swallowed hard. Oh no. The jungle was no longer a battlefield. It was a meat grinder. A chaotic, beer-fueled, high-explosive carnival of destruction where the rules of conventional warfare had not just been broken, but set on fire, shot out of a cannon, and buried. Under a mountain of duct tape and bad decisions. And the Zenithians. They were the main attraction. General Krith's forces were in full-blown panic mode, scattering like insects caught in a hurricane. Their sleek, high-tech armor was dented, covered in mud, or in some cases actively on fire. Their once pristine formations had dissolved into a desperate scramble for survival, their advanced weaponry now a liability in a jungle that refused to play by their rules. A Zenithian sergeant, his once shiny exosuit now dangling in loose, vine-covered tatters, crouched behind a fallen log, panting, clutching his plasma rifle like a lifeline. "Command," he hissed into his comms. "Command, do you read me? We are not winning." A voice crackled back, strained and irritable. "What do you mean we are not winning? You have superior technology, superior numbers, and superior training." A sharp rustling noise snapped the sergeant's attention sideways. His visor detected motion. The jungle was shifting. No, not the jungle. Something in the jungle. Something watching him. He swallowed hard. "Sir, with all due respect, I don't think you understand the creatures we are fighting." He turned his helmet to infrared mode. Heat signatures flickered. Movement. Too fast. "They're here." A guttural voice whispered in his ear. "Hey there, sunshine." The Zenithian barely had time to scream before he was gone, yanked into the underbrush by unseen hands. The radio feed cut to static. Up in orbit, aboard the glorious Conquest, General Krith gripped the command console with increasing anxiety, watching the horror unfold across multiple live feeds. The jungle had swallowed half of his ground forces. Troops were vanishing. Weapons were being stolen, repurposed, or used against their original owners, and now, somehow, his own war machines had been hijacked. His mandibles twitched in barely contained fury as he replayed the most recent footage. A towering Zenithian battle mech, once the pinnacle of Dominion engineering, now rebranded with crude jungle graffiti, stomping through his fleeing soldiers like a drunk elder god. Sitting on top of the mech's shoulders, casually sipping a beer, was Corporal Boom Boom Riley. "Hey, boys," Riley shouted gleefully, waving his free hand. "Check it out! We got a new ride!" Inside the mech's cockpit, Lieutenant Alvarez grinned, his fingers flying over the alien controls. "Oh, hell yeah! Turns out these things run on a simpler system than my uncle's lawnmower." The mech's targeting array flickered online. Fresh squad of Zenithian reinforcements had just landed, weapons primed. Alvarez cracked his knuckles. Time to send him a warm welcome. He slammed a button. The mech's arms swung up, dual plasma cannons charging with a menacing whir, a single glorious beat of silence. Then, absolute hellfire. The first barrage of plasma erupted forward, sending the newly arrived Zenithian reinforcements into pure, unfiltered panic. One soldier dove sideways, his translator catching the distant, blood-curdling scream of an earthling. "Get some!" The second barrage struck the ground, obliterating what had been a carefully arranged supply depot. The explosion sent debris flying in all directions, raining twisted metal and shattered crates onto the battlefield. "Woo!" Riley whooped, slapping the side of the mech. "Hell of a recoil on this bad boy." Alvarez, eyes still locked on the screen, frowned. Wait a second. Their supply crates just went up like they were packed with jet fuel. Another explosion rocked the jungle. Private Benny Ghost Vasquez's voice crackled over comms. "That's because they were packed with jet fuel. Also, I may or may not have stuffed them full of C4 while they weren't looking." McAllister's laughter rumbled over the radio. "I love this damn unit." Meanwhile, Gunnery Sergeant Duke Six-Pack Harlan wandered through the battlefield, shotgun slung over one shoulder, cracking open yet another beer with his teeth. He took a slow sip, surveying the carnage like a man admiring a particularly nice sunset. "You know," he mused, "this might be the most fun I've had since Okinawa." For the Zenithians, the battle had spiraled beyond mere defeat. It was humiliation. It was terror. They had come expecting a primitive backwater world, ripe for conquest. Instead, they had landed in a nightmarish jungle of invisible enemies, mind-bending, traps and unkillable warriors who fought like demons possessed. Their orbital sensors now registered multiple distress signals, plasma rifles abandoned, vehicles overturned, entire platoons surrendering not just to the humans, but to the damn jungle itself. One Zenithian soldier, wide-eyed and trembling, held up his hands as he stumbled into a clearing where 3 Marines sat casually drinking beers. "Please," he choked out. I surrender. The nearest Marine, Private First Class Benny Ghost Vasquez, grinned, tossing him a beer. Attaboy. The soldier stared at the can in horror. What is this? Your welcome package, Vasquez said, cracking his own can open. Rules of the jungle, buddy. You survive, you drink. The soldier hesitated. Then, slowly, he lifted the can to his mandibles. Holy stars, he gasped after the first sip. This is delicious. Vasquez clapped him on the back. Welcome to Earth, kid. Meanwhile, deep within the Zenithian command post, Captain Vrak stood rigid, watching the devastation unfold on the holoscreens. He turned toward General Krith with something bordering on actual fear. Sir, he said quietly. We need to leave. Krith's claws dug into the control panel. We do not retreat. Vrak hesitated. Then, with careful deliberation, he turned the holoscreen to another feed. It was a live broadcast, Galactic news. And across the stars, millions of species were watching the worst military disaster in Zenithian history unfold in real time. The headline scrolled across the screen in bold, mocking text. Zenithian forces lose war to trees, beer, and monkeys. Krith inhaled sharply. No. His mind refused to accept it. Not like this. Not at the hands of primitive savages. Not on a jungle world where the very laws of reason had been spat upon. Not where the enemy fought with laughter in their eyes. Another explosion rocked the jungle, then another, then the unmistakable sound of a Marine shouting, "Yee-haw!" As someone, came barreling out of the trees, riding a goddamn alien hovercraft like a rodeo bull. And finally, Sergeant Jack Mad Dog McAllister's voice rang out across the open comms. "Hey, Zenithian Command," he bellowed. "Y'all ready to call it quits, or do we gotta embarrass you some more?" Silence. Then, finally, General Krith whispered the words he never thought he'd say. Order the retreat. General Krith had never tasted defeat before. The Zenithian Dominion prided itself on conquest, on tactical superiority, on grinding lesser species beneath their boots without so much as a struggle. Yet here he stood, his claws gripping the command, console so tightly that the reinforced metal groaned beneath his fingers, watching the biggest disaster in his military career unfold. His forces weren't just losing, they were being mocked. The battlefield, if it could still be called that, had become a carnival of destruction. The Zenithian war machines, once the pinnacle of their military might, had either been hijacked, sabotaged, or, in one particularly baffling case, turned into a makeshift party bus for the human warriors. Through the holofeeds, Krith saw a group of Marines standing atop a captured Zenithian hovercraft, beers in hand, blasting rock music so loudly that it was registering as a sonic disturbance on the ship's sensors. And then there was him, the leader of the human forces. The one they called Mad Dog. Sergeant Jack Mad Dog McAllister stood in the middle of the battlefield, covered in dirt, gunpowder, and what appeared to be the blood of several unidentifiable jungle creatures. A cigar burned between his teeth, his shotgun slung casually over one shoulder. The bastard was grinning. Krith felt his mandibles grind against each other. This wasn't just defeat. It was personal. "Sir," Captain Vrak said, his voice shaking. "Our forces are in full collapse. We must leave." Krith let out a slow, seething breath. "No," Vrak hesitated. "Sir," Krith slammed his fist against the console, making several officers flinch. "I will not let our people be remembered as the ones who lost to this." Vrak turned his gaze toward the main holofeed. It displayed a Zenithian soldier, stripped of his armor, his helmet missing, sitting among a group of humans. One of them, a burly Marine with a scar over his eye, was slapping the soldier's back and handing him what the humans referred to as a beer. The Zenithian soldier hesitated for a moment. Then, slowly, he raised the can to his mandibles and took a sip. A look of utter bliss crossed his face. The Marine grinned. "Not bad, huh?" The soldier swallowed and nodded. This is delicious. Vrak swallowed hard. Sir, I don't think we can win this. Krith clenched his jaw. We still have our fleet, our ships, our orbital cannons. Vrak shook his head. If we use them, we'll be firing on our own troops. The ones who haven't already surrendered are actively defecting just to drink with the enemy. Krith turned back to the screen. On the battlefield, the few remaining Zenithian soldiers were waving white flags. A few were even joining the Marines in what appeared to be some kind of impromptu jungle barbecue. McAllister stood nearby, holding a radio, his gaze locked on the sky. Then he grinned. "Yo, Zenithian Command," he said, his voice carrying through every open channel. Krith's mandibles twitched in fury. McAllister lifted a bottle of beer and saluted the sky. "You boys put up a hell of a fight," he said. "Real good effort. A+ for enthusiasm." He took a sip. "But let's be honest. You're outclassed, outgunned, and outdrunk. So unless you really want to keep throwing your boys into the meat grinder, I suggest you pack it up," Krith seethed. He dares mock us?" McAllister exhaled a cloud of cigar smoke. "Oh, and by the way, you leave now. We promise not to chase your retreating asses all the way back to whatever fancy space palace you came from." His grin widened. "But if you stay..." He cracked his knuckles. "Well, let's just say Boom Boom still got a lot of explosives left, and we just figured out how to hack your fleet's targeting systems." Somewhere behind McAllister, Corporal Boom Boom Riley held up a captured Zenithian wrist console. He wiggled his fingers. "Boop," he said, pressing a button. From orbit, alarms blared through the glorious conquest as several Zenithian warships suddenly received new targeting commands. Krith's eyes widened in horror. "No," he breathed. Then, the fleet opened fire on itself. Explosions rocked the Zenithian ships. Several of them immediately broke formation, desperately trying to reconfigure their systems, but the humans' crude hacking methods had overridden their protocols. Vrak grabbed Krith's shoulder. "Sir, we must retreat. The humans have taken control of our fleet's targeting systems. They're using our own weapons against us." Krith's claws trembled. Defeat, humiliation, and then the final blow. The Galactic news broadcast updated. Its headline, "Breaking News. Zenithian invasion fleet gets its ass handed to them by monkeys and jungle witchcraft." The subheadline was even worse. "Zenithian troops caught drinking with the enemy. War effort now classified as massive party." Krith exhaled. Then finally he spoke. "Order the retreat." Vrak nodded, tapping the controls. Across the Zenithian fleet, the retreat order blared through the comms. The few remaining Zenithian soldiers in the jungle, those who hadn't already joined the human festivities, scrambled toward the extraction points. Down below, McAllister watched. The alien dropships rise into the sky, chuckling to himself. "Guess they do have some sense," he mused. Boom Boom, Riley cracked open another beer. "Damn shame. I was just starting to like those guys." McAllister turned toward the remnants of the battle. A few Zenithians still lingered, not because they were fighting, but because they were too busy hanging out with the Marines. One of them, helmet removed, beer in hand, looked up as his fellow soldiers retreated. "Should we be going?" he asked. The Marine beside him, Private First Class Vasquez, shrugged. "Up to you, bud." The Zenithian hesitated. Then he took another sip of beer. "Nah." The glorious conquest and what remained of the Zenithian fleet fled Earth's orbit, their engines burning bright as they vanished into the depths of space. Inside the command center, Krith stood in stunned silence. This was worse than defeat. This was shame. He turned to Vrak. "We do not speak of this," Vrak coughed. "Agreed." A silence stretched between them. Then, hesitantly, Vrak pulled something from behind his back. Krith stared. It was a beer can, a human beer can. "Where did you get that?" Krith asked. Vrak coughed again. I might have grabbed it. From one of the supply crates before we left." Krith's mandibles twitched. He looked at the can. He looked at Vrak. Pour me a glass. Back on Earth, the jungle returned to its usual chaotic self. McAllister stretched, rolling his shoulders. Well, boys, he said, exhaling contentedly. Another day, another victory. Vasquez raised a beer. Semper Fi. The jungle rustled, in agreement. Somewhere in the distance, a monkey still wielded a stolen Zenithian plasma rifle. The war was over. The party, however, was just beginning.